welcome to our presentation. We're going to be talking about a new wheelchair accessible trail, conceptual design up at Saddle Rock. Has anyone been to Saddle Rock, know about Saddle Rock here? I know the locals have. But Saddle Rock's a really cool geological structure kind of in the south end of town. You can see it. It almost looks like a set of horns, and the Piscosa word for it is two bears. Has an existing parking area and a flat area, super steep zone, but we're focused on the flat area near the parking lot and building a wheelchair accessible loop. And we're gonna talk about the community input and engagement we've done and has been done over the last couple of years, and how we got to the design we got to so far. My name is Ryan Gregg. I work for Chelan Douglas Land Trust, a local nonprofit. We're a land trust, but we manage a lot of trails, and we have a pretty cool patchwork of land ownership, and we're kind of the consistent trail manager across that patchwork of land ownership. Yeah, that's me. I'm gonna let Erin introduce herself.
And I'm Erin Keeley. I'm an accessibility consultant and have been consulting with the Land Trust on this project, just kind of giving that lens of accessibility in the design process.
Okay, so I already gave you a tiny bit of background, but here's a map so that you can associate it with. The Saddle Rock Natural Area is pretty close to downtown, which makes it a great opportunity for schools and the public to get there. There's a bus stop with free transportation right at the trailhead. It's about 850 acres of city land that encompasses the primary area we're looking at. There's adjacent public access lands, one owned by Chelan Douglas Land Trust, another owned by Dry Gulch LLC, that there's public access, but we're focused on the city property right here for the accessible trail and greater trail planning throughout the area. It came to be over years of collaboration with the city and Chelan Douglas Land Trust. This area used to be a big gold mine, so it's got a pretty neat history. I probably won't get too much into that. It will come up with one of the design elements we have with this plan, the old mining process. But yeah, I was just at a Chelan Douglas Land Trust event at Saddle Rock where we invited people to come out and just celebrate the foothills forever. And what people were speaking about there was just how valuable Saddle Rock is and all the foothills, because it's incredible just having the natural area so close to town, so easy to get to, and just you feel like you're actually out in the backcountry when you get up into the terrain. But it's an interesting trail management problem, a cool one to have, but there's a ton of unauthorized trails, some authorized trails, and there's virtually been no trail maintenance since it's kind of been used as a recreation area, and that's been due to the mining issues with contaminated soil. So the city recently did a mitigation project, and since that happened, now we're allowed to do some trail maintenance. And but before major maintenance and planning could occur, Hannah Beener, who's here today, led this really cool public engagement, public input, and just like thinking and planning process for the Saddle Rock Natural Area. I think I'm not sure when it started, but it wrapped up in 2023. And this document and that process that the Land Trust led, surveying the community in English and Spanish, bringing in folks who typically don't get to weigh in on these types of outdoor rec decisions. All that information we got from the Land Trust in this report formed the foundation for our little piece of designing this accessible trail. And the community, what they told us they want are, trails that are slightly more inclusive to a more, I guess, a broad visitor spectrum, so wider trails. Folks brought up the fact that, narrow trails that are grown in with grass can be a little scary because of rattlesnakes, not being able to see the edges. So we got really good information like that. We got information that some folks like some steep trails, so that was important to keep around as well. But folks overall, they want to see improvements like this accessible trail, more signage, and more amenities. So there's, I just learned that in 2024, this year so far, over 3,000 students have visited the Saddle Rock Natural Area, which is a lot for our little town. Aaron and I were at Saddle Rock for a scouting visit last spring, where we witnessed just this massive horde of students walking through the flat basin where we want to build this trail, and we were both like, yeah, we need to build this trail. We need some amenity areas, because there were just students, like 30 students huddled in the grass, like trying to pay attention to their teacher. So it's a very appropriate project for the visitors that are here. So after kind of digesting and the Land Trust putting together this access plan, the Land Trust went after funding from RCO, Planning and Access Grant, to hire an accessibility consultant to weigh in on the things we should be thinking about with wheelchair accessibility, and also complete an accessibility audit of the parking area, and just to put together a more specific plan for the accessible trail loop. So Aaron and myself have been working on that this year as part of that grant, and Aaron's going to share with you what we've discovered and how the community engagement process has gone, and how it influenced our plan to evolve over this past year. So I'll pass it on to Aaron.
All right, so the initial Saddle Rock Trail Planning group that Hannah led last year, I was lucky enough to get to be a part of that. So it's been kind of cool to be a part of this process from, well, not the get-go, because I know a lot of work went into that before we were involved, but Hannah did a really good job of having a variety of stakeholders in the room to provide input. And this was for the Saddle Rock area in general, not just specific to this accessible trail. It was just, what do all of these stakeholders want to see as part of this access plan for the Saddle Rock area? So like I said, a wide variety of voices in the room to provide their input for what they wanted in this access plan. And from that feedback, there was kind of a list of priorities of what people wanted to consider as a higher priority project, and then what were some things for just kind of to incorporate down the road. And one of the priorities from this group was to put in an accessible trail at the Saddle Rock area. At the same time that this focus group was going on for Saddle Rock, there was another group going on in town that I got to be a part of called Belonging in the Outdoors. And this was a workshop series that was looking on a broader scale of what does our community want and need for the outdoors in our area to feel more welcoming and inclusive and accessible. So we held it was a workshop series that we tried to keep very low barrier for people to attend. Had a lot of outreach to try and just get different community vendors and community members involved. They were free to attend. They were outside of typical work hours. We had food and drinks for free. We had free childcare there. We had translation services, including ASL. There was closed captioning on any videos we played, and tried to really make a welcoming environment for people to feel comfortable sharing their feedback with us. So from this group, we ended up coming up with, there were 17 different action steps that were recommended to community leaders in order to make the outdoors feel more welcoming and accessible. So we wrote up this report that had all these 17 action steps, as well as potential community leaders to take on these action steps and implement them into their policies and protocols. The Chelan Douglas Land Trust was one of those identified potential leaders, and one of the action steps in that report was creating a model accessible trail, and that was where the Land Trust was tagged as being a potential leader. Some of the other action steps were also about universal signage and being more inclusive when trails are being planned and developed. So it was pretty cool to see that both the Saddle Rock group and this Belonging in the Outdoors group, they were totally separate from each other, just kind of coincidence happening at the same time. But both of these groups were saying that they wanted to have an accessible trail in town. So showing us the community wants this, and there is a need for it. So this is the map that Ryan showed, and the areas that we're talking about specifically for this accessible trail is where this yellow circle is down in the bottom corner there. Beyond that, the terrain does start to get pretty steep and go up into the foothills. And so we're kind of focusing on this kind of lower corner here. And this is right off of the main parking lot. So there's a little hiker symbol there, and that is where the main parking lot and main facilities are. There's restrooms and a pavilion and stuff there. And then just another view of this site. So we've got the looped parking lot here, and this is that flat area that was circled in the previous map where that accessible trail would be going into. And that, just to note, any trails that you see in that area are all unauthorized trails, but clearly very heavily used. As with any trail build, there are different restrictions and things that we need to consider for the construction of this trail. There's some land use restrictions. It's a little tough to tell in this picture, but there is a line of power poles going through the area. And unless we get the budget to bury those suckers, we're stuck having to make sure we have appropriate buffers around each of those poles. We also want to make sure that the trail is built in a sustainable way, making sure that that reduces maintenance, but also maintains the accessibility aspect of it. If we've got washout and ruts, that's getting rid of the accessible nature of this trail. We also want things to be very robust and durable so they can hold up against vandalism and against weather. We do have some pretty long cold winters and dry hot summers, so making sure things are durable and can hold up to a variety of conditions. Of course, budget confinements, and we do have quite a few different user groups that would be using this area and that currently do specifically go right through this area. This is one of those unauthorized trails that goes through the accessible area. There's hikers, bikers, walkers, and horses that all go right through this area. So definitely some potential for conflict there. And since this is city land, we do also need to consider future developments that they have in mind for this area to make sure that we're coordinating with them appropriately. And while we're looking at the accessible trail, we want to make sure that we're also looking at what other areas can be improved as well, so that people don't just have this trail, but they can also access the parking lot has some accessible spots, that the bathrooms are accessible, and that there's access routes between all of these different places on site. Up in this picture, you can kind of see up behind the bathroom, there's a pavilion up there, so improving the route to get up to there. And then improving and adding the signage for this new accessible route as well as the existing trails that are in the area. So once we had an initial design and idea of what we wanted to do for the accessible trail, Ryan and I reached out to do some more community feedback specific for this trail to see what does the community really want now that we're kind of diving a little bit deeper into the details of the trail design. So we had quite a few different options for people to give feedback. We had a community input meeting which had a presentation with time for Q&A and then an open house afterwards. We had this in person and then as well as a virtual option so people could log in remotely to still participate. And then we have the recording and a transcript from that evening lives online on the Land Trust website along with other resources for the project and contact information so people can go to that website and be led to give some more feedback. They've done social media posts, newsletters. The Land Trust held a lunch and learn event for, I think that was mainly local businesses and organizations to attend during their lunch breaks to give feedback. And then we've also presented to our local Arts, Recreation, and Parks Commission, and kind of at each phase of development, we also meet with the City Parks and Rec Director as well to make sure that what we're doing will go well with kind of how the city operates as well.
And we also sent out a survey about this trail specifically in English and Spanish to all of our membership and asked folks to pass that along as well.
Yeah. Thanks. So as far as the accessible trail features, we've known from the get-go we don't want this to be a paved trail. We want to give people that experience of being out in nature. And so we're still going to keep the trail as a natural surface, probably some crushed gravel or something along those lines. But there are some existing accessible trails that are still a natural surface that work really well. We plan to have the trail be about 6 to 8 feet wide with plenty of areas to pass and to turn around, and keeping the grade as shallow as we can with the goal of staying under 5% throughout. With the area that we are kind of restricted to for this trail, we'll end up with probably about 3/4 of a mile of accessible trail, which we actually got some pretty positive feedback from the community saying that they felt like for the audience for this specific site that they felt like that was actually a really good length to have. And then having trail information that is more objective and provided in multiple formats. So different languages, it can be accessed online, that people have a lot of different contexts that they're able to get the information about the trail. And these are just some examples that I admittedly took straight off of the Beneficial Designs website because we thought they were good examples of objective trail information rather than using a subjective rating of easy or hard or green or blue routes. People just have the objective information about the trails themselves to let themselves know what's ahead and make that decision for themselves if this is going to be an appropriate trail for them. And then with our hot sunny days, having some places where people can get some respite from the sun and sit and have a break, but also having a pad under the shelter as well that can accommodate a wheelchair. We'd like to have some gathering places for those school groups to be able to meet up, have educational presentations, or just have it be a general place where the community can go and that can be their meeting spot, go have lunch or something. And also potentially a spot maybe to have tribal ceremonies or other events that might be, that this area might be used for. And again, still keeping with natural features using rocks or basalt columns, something like that, and varying the height of those so that it can kind of accommodate different height users as well. We would like to also phase in some braille trail features, so having a guideline around the outside perimeter of the trail so people can guide with their hand around the trail, and having this be something that's going to be durable rather than a rope, having it be some sort of cable or chain that can hold up to weather conditions, vandalism, fire, but we also need to keep in mind that something that won't be like a cable that might fray since people need to run their hand along it. So all of those little details still kind of needing to work out on some of those. Having this guideline will also help serve as kind of a barrier for the accessible trail area, which has a couple benefits of one being that it will hopefully cut down on any social trails that cut through the area since they'll have this guideline in the way. And then one of our goals with this trail is thinking not just about physical disabilities, but also looking at cognitive disabilities as well. So there could maybe be an assisted living facility or an adult family home that could bring some of their residents here, let them wander around, and as long as they're staying within that guideline on the trails, they don't have to worry about them getting off onto other trails up into the foothills and kind of wandering off. So kind of making a little bit of a safety catchment area to kind of keep people and also school groups kind of contained within this area. This guideline would also have some amenity markers along the way, like you can see in that lower picture there, and that will let people know when there is maybe a sign or a bench or something nearby. And then on our signage, thinking about including some braille signs or even just a raised map on the sign so people can have that tactile information to know the kind of the trail alignment. And then having some sensory stations involved so that people can have opportunities to use other senses, where we can have some native plants where they will have interesting smells or textures, having areas where people are invited to stop and listen to what they can hear around them, whether that's different bird calls or little critters down in some of the shrubs or something. And then also having some areas for kind of that sensory stimulation via movement. So getting that vestibular system activated as well for maybe some of the kiddos in the school groups that need just a little bit more movement in their day. And while we don't want to pollute the view with a bunch of signage, we do want to have some opportunities for some educational points along the way, as well as additional navigation signs so people kind of can keep track maybe at each rest stop of how far they've gone, what's ahead, how far to the next rest stop, to know kind of how far they've gone and if they have it enough to get around or if they should be turning back. So along the way, during our design process, evolution of all these design concepts, we have come across some barriers and kind of had to be kind of flexible in how we get a solution. One of our barriers is that around the end of this parking lot, there is this drainage swale that you can see in those pictures off to the left. And this is something that clearly is not accessible, but it's something that we can't touch. So this cannot be modified at all, and the grade of the terrain there isn't really appropriate to do any type of boardwalk or anything over it because there's just not the height clearance. So we have decided that we would actually move our intended accessible trailhead was going to be at the end of this parking lot where there's already kind of a natural unauthorized trail through there. We decided we would actually just move the trailhead off to the other side of the parking lot, which is right at the end of where that drainage swale is, so we can not have to worry about dealing with any of those rocks there. And then there are, within that, the area where the trail's going in, there are some drainage areas that we also have to worry about. Initially, we were trying to get a trail alignment where we would just avoid all those drainage areas, but as you'll kind of see on some later map designs, it really limited what we could do with the trail alignment. So solution basically was just go ahead and kind of, I guess, do it right and take advantage of the whole landscape and just include in the budget to have some bridges, boardwalks, or culverts to be able to get over those other drainage areas. Having accessible parking is obviously going to be important. The top picture here shows the existing accessible spaces. There are 4 spaces here, which is, I think, actually more than enough for the overall number of spaces for this area, but they are all off on the right end of the parking lot, and they're about as far away as you can get from where the accessible trailhead is going to go in. Initially, we figured we would just restripe the parking lot to add in some spaces, but then realized the grade of the parking lot and the existing spaces is 5%, and an accessible space can only be about 2%. So then we thought we could be able to resurface a couple spots to make them an accessible grade and have like a transition slope up to the main bit of the parking lot. But then we were told that that does not work well with winter plowing. Because they want to have a nice smooth surface all throughout the parking lot. So the current solution is near the accessible trailhead on that end of the parking lot, that the city was actually on board with us extending the pavement out and creating a 2% slope pad that would accommodate 2 accessible parking spots, and it would be right adjacent to the trailhead. Another barrier that thankfully Ryan thought of sooner rather than later was that the initial design plan was to actually build the trail, was to dig down several inches and have these layers of crushed stone that would be really good drainage. You have this nice slope over the top, but then because of the previous mining activity that Ryan mentioned, there are possibly high levels of arsenic in the ground. And so it's not really reasonable or financially feasible to be digging down, disrupting all the earth, and dealing with all of this contaminated soil. And so the preferred option as our solution is that we're looking at building up rather than digging down. So looking at some other options there that would still provide good drainage, but would serve basically to be able to cap off any land that we disrupted which should be an okay way to go about mitigating the potential arsenic in that area. So for our trail alignment, the map on the left is just a zoomed in shot from the bigger map in that lower right hand corner. With that, the pink trail going through there is that main unauthorized trail that's heavily used. The very initial plan for the accessible route was that unauthorized trail, we would just make that an authorized trail. Since people are kind of heavily using it anyway, let's just go ahead and make that authorized. And then the accessible trail would be a loop with a couple cut-throughs. So the initial thought was increasing the available mileage for the trail, as well as giving people some options of if they wanted to do a small loop or a big loop or kind of do some figure eights through it. So that was where we had started. But then we were realizing with this trail design that we did come across some barriers with this one. Having all of those intersections meant that it made the navigation a lot more complex. We would need a lot more signage, and it could make the landscape a little bit confusing for people to be able to navigate kind of where they're at within that trail and which direction to turn to kind of have the quickest way back to the trailhead if they needed to. And then having the kind of that shared use path going through the middle of it also meant a higher likelihood for different user group conflicts, especially since that would be used by horses a lot of the time going right through the middle of there. That could be really intimidating for people. So we wanted to create something where people felt safe and comfortable getting out on this trail and didn't have to worry about other user groups or any confusion with the navigation. So one of the key factors I think that has helped with the user group conflict is that we have shifted this orange line. That's the kind of shared use trail. So we've shifted that closer to the base of the foothills. So it'll be up a little bit higher, but it'll just kind of hug the lower contour of the foothills there. And then that leaves this whole rest of the area for an accessible trail without having to worry about other trails crossing through it. As I had mentioned, there were some drainage areas that were initially an issue, so we were kind of initially thinking about having this skinnier loop on the top, that top pink one, be kind of one of the main accessible trails. When Ryan and I went out and walked this trail alignment, you never really felt like you were that far away from the other half of that loop, especially if we're looking at like 6 to 8 feet wide trail. You always kind of felt like, especially on this kind of more northern part of the loop there, the shared use trail was right to your right, and then the other half of the trail that you were on was right to your left. And so it felt a little too condensed trying to stay in that area. And then we also had a consideration of just this kind of lollipop loop that would come off of the bottom, so that we would still have a drainage crossing, but it would just be one bridge instead of 3 or 4. But we decided that we really wanted to take advantage of that whole landscape and really just simplify the navigation. And so we've really tried to expand the trail as much as we can in that area. So this alignment is about that 3/4 of a mile mark. Each of these black boxes there represents a drainage crossing. And this one we really liked. When we were doing this alignment, when you're on one half of the loop, the contour of the land means that you can't see the other half of the trail. So it really does improve the user experience. It gets people out there really feeling like they're part of nature, which is exactly what we intended. And then this is our fairly final plan that we're working with at the moment. So on this map, we can see we've got the accessible parking spaces extended out at that end, and then we've got one single loop for the accessible trail. Each of these kind of nodes around the trail is a proposed rest stop area, with one of those probably being a larger gathering space. I think the only shift at this point is for each of those rest stops would actually be inside the loop rather than outside, so that we could still have a braille trail guideline going around the outside. Those really only work if you can have an uninterrupted path the whole way around. So yeah, this is kind of our what we're working with at the moment, and likely probably close to the actual final trail alignment, which is kind of exciting to be at that point. And then I just wanted to share if anyone wanted to check it out. This is the website that the Land Trust has, where it has all of the resources for the Saddle Rock project and ways for people to contact and give more information. And then our contact information as well. And I think, did you have anything else?
I was just gonna kind of add, I guess it's been such an interesting process because since the Land Trust is leading this effort, but it's on city land, and we're working with all these different partners, it felt like our role has been to listen to the community and everybody we've asked for input on, and try to figure out how to make that work on a more technical level. Like, you know, I'm a trail nerd, so I figure out the trail stuff, and then Aaron's the accessibility expert, so then we come up with a practical way to implement what our community is telling us. But then we go and meet with engineers in the city and get their feedback, and that's been kind of interesting because we're just chasing answers all the time. Engineers have really helpful information on how we can, you know, what drainage structure we can use and which location, and what information they might need from the city to figure out a solution for crossing over that drainage swale. And the drainages are really funny too because they never have water in them, but
they could.
They could.
They might.
So we talk to engineers, we talk to the community, we start coming up with solutions, and we go to the city and we get information about, like, oh, you can't do that because, you know, we have to plow these lots and that's a big expense. We need to make that as easy as possible. We get all these little, tease out all these little tidbits from the city, and then it's just been, we've just been bringing all that information together, and I think we have a solid plan now. Next steps are we're going to ensure our stakeholders have seen this plan, felt like they've weighed in on it, and then we got to figure out funding for sure. But I guess I foresee, I'm planning on, ideally I would love to put out a design build contract, so you know, whatever firm we're working with kind of does the last 20 or 10% of the design to figure out, you know, final materials, final alignment, parking lot, all this sort of, you know, traffic flow, all that sort of stuff, and then execute the design on the ground. But yeah, hopefully within a couple years we can get this thing moving.
Yeah. Any questions or feedback?
So I think it's really interesting that this is on city property, but the Land Trust is managing it. So in the future, would the Land Trust continue to be the agency that would like go after funding opportunities and oversee construction? And like, would maintenance be under the city or under you, or?
It would probably all be us.
Okay.
Yeah, we're definitely taking the lead on getting the funding and wrangling everybody. I think to get the funding we need, we definitely need solid partnerships to go after the grants we're looking at. And the city's happy to be our partner, but enhancements, whether for accessibility or not, just for that trailhead and even for some of the trails, they're not a part of the current capital improvement project list for the city. So, you know, they're on board, they're supportive, but they can't commit dollars right away to this project. They can only just commit support. And then for maintenance, it'll probably be us as well. The city, I believe, they maintain the parking area currently, but we're managing the trails as they are right now. So this will probably just continue to fall under CDLT. Yeah.
I have a question about the parking. because it seems like such a great trail could draw more people than people who are disabled other than just wheelchair. And whether people with walkers or just limited walking ability, it looks like it'll be a great option for people. So what is the thinking, or if there's some kind of event, like a veterans event or something that's gonna pull more people in, what is the thinking on having only 2 handicap spaces, that people will just park in the non-handicapped as well, or what is the thinking behind? And you went from, or going from 4 to 2, so.
So those 4 that exist on the other end of the parking lot, those would stay.
Oh,
So
okay.
this would be an additional 2 spots. So there'd be 6 in total.
Okay.
And just 2 would be nearby, and then the other 4 would stay on that other end. And so one of our hopes for at least a future phase, if not an initial one, is to improve the path to get there. Right now, there's kind of gravel path that people would go on to get from the other accessible sites to the trail. And it's just a little bit of a squishy route to get from A to B, and so that's one of our goals, is to get that path, even if it's a little bit longer than we'd like, to at least have it be an improved surface. Yeah.
And there are 3 bus parking spots, and Link Transit has a bus stop there. So that's what the student groups do currently. They usually take 3 buses when needed. But the city does have it.
These spots here are where buses can pull in, so yeah, I think even if it's just temporary, that somebody could pull in there to unload, and if they had someone to move, yeah.
I think long-term the city has been planning on putting in another row of parking to the left of the double row there. But again, they don't have committed dollars to that. So that is one remaining thing we're trying to explore, is, and it's a little bit hard to plan for, but if we built kind of a little jut out parking peninsula for this accessible trail, could we construct it in a way that will accommodate a future parking lot expansion? But there's also adjacent land that could be another potential parking area, overflow parking, that would work as well. But yeah.
Does Link Transit currently have accessible buses?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, they have the fold down kneeling
Yeah.
buses. Yeah, and Link's totally free, and they have Link Plus, which is almost
Paratransit.
Yeah, paratransit. Yeah.
I'm looking on designing an accessible trail to be really similar to this, except that it's gonna have about 6 climbing turns to get from the elevation change that I have. And what I'd like to do is to have, of course, the climbing turns will have a nice gentle grade, but have cut-throughs that would be more direct, probably use like rustic rock staircases to cut through each of the turns. But I haven't seen any examples of that anywhere in like a national forest. I've seen it in a park where you have a ramp and then like some concrete stairs. But Aaron, have you encountered that ever, an accessible design?
I haven't really, and it's funny you mentioned that, because I was looking at another project where that was a kind of a potential thing, where you could have, kind of a shortcut. And I think, what was that?
And a legit shortcut.
Right, where it was actually intended to be a shortcut. I think that there's, part of my thought process is that you try to make the accessible route the route, so that it still keeps people together, and it doesn't, it doesn't allow for people to kind of separate, or still have the other way for other people to go, because I think that can still kind of communicate a sense of this staircase to go straight up is the general way to go, but if you use a wheelchair, you have to go this way. So I think there's kind of that mindset of just having that just be what your path is. Of course, if you've got regular maintenance people coming through there, or if you need some sort of emergency direct route for something along those lines, then yeah. But I always lean towards just having that be the route that everyone goes.
those.
I have seen that before. I've been trying to place where. It may have been in a park in Niagara Falls, New York. I'll have to look it up to see. But they had a concrete wheelchair accessible route that was confined to this just narrow park, and they had to gain a lot of elevation, but right up the center was a staircase. Just because I do think it's an interesting idea, because you're
Yeah.
essentially planning for a desire path.
Yeah.
And just making sure it's a durable surface.
Yeah, I guess that's part of it too, yeah, depending on where it's at, because in my brain I was picturing with this, there's the, to get up to the pavilion from these parking spots, there is the switchback path to get up there, where that's not that big of a burden for people that are ambulatory to just do a few switchbacks, but I guess, yeah, if you are in an area where you anticipate people are gonna do that anyway, then I think that can be an exception, just to at least give them the structure to do that, so they're not tearing up the trail design.
The conversation I had with Forest Services to put it in the NEPA, and then if they decide to build it, it's already been approved.
Oh.
And wait and see if there's those desired paths.
Yeah.
To go.
Yeah.
But I don't have any examples to show the team, like, this is what I want you to write about, and take a picture or something.
Right, yeah.
Niagara Falls, okay, I'll Google search.
It could have been a completely different spot. I know.
I'm gonna email you if I can't find it.
Yeah. I've seen it, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
There you go. Go for it.
Are there other amenities that you considered at the trailhead? There's the accessible parking, but are there currently like accessible restrooms or?
Yes and no.
Okay.
The restrooms are technically they're ADA.
Mhm.
But one of the issues which I see quite frequently is that the restrooms are on kind of that cement platform, and the rocks have worn away, and so there's I think up to like a 2-inch lip to get up onto the concrete to get into the back of it.
Right.
So that's one of the things on our to-do list of things to be addressed. So yes and no.
One thing that was super cool about working with Erin is she did a accessibility audit of the existing site. We got a lot of info from that. Could you go back to a photo of? Let's see. Yeah, that one works. There are some kind of cool amenities that are already like that little switchback path up to the pavilion. The pavilion has a bunch of picnic tables in there, and then it connects back down to the lot. This is a native plant garden in the middle, and then right here it's almost like amphitheater seating. And we just had an event there today, and it was pretty cool. Nice little site to have. I don't know, you can have speakers. There's actually a mariachi band there today. But yeah, we definitely want to make improvements to the existing surfacing to ensure that there's a clear, actually firm surface, because that gravel's a little coarse and loose. It's not really up to what we think
Yeah.
is appropriate for the site, but
And with that pavilion, they've got, it's packed full of picnic tables, and technically they have the appropriate number of accessible picnic tables, but they aren't bolted down, and so they get moved around a lot. And so when I went there to do my audit of all of the facilities, you couldn't wheel through the pavilion because the picnic tables were all smushed together. The accessible spots of the picnic tables you couldn't get to. I think you couldn't get to one of them, and then another one, if you sat at it, you would be blocking the pathway for anyone else to get through. The kind of amphitheater seating area, there's some improvements there that could be made. So yeah, kind of a lot of, what do you call it? Scope creep.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, but I think little by little, I think there's kind of some tweaks that can be made to a lot of the facilities that are there.
And in your outreach, were there any like trailhead amenities that stood out to you that you heard from people that were different than just the typical things that you usually hear?
Well, I mean, some folks got really detailed with their feedback.
Yeah.
Like one person was talking about sensory areas and having native plants in elevated
Yeah.
beds so that it could accommodate like folks in a wheelchair
Yeah.
kind of reaching over and interacting and smelling. So just like allowing, making sure there's plant areas at different heights, and for the Burrell Trail, having the guide ropes, like multiple different height guide ropes to accommodate different heights. That was all really cool information.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was more, just some features along the trail. I don't think we got anything that was too out there or unexpected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have an answer for this one, because I haven't found it still at Braswell, but we work on crushed rock wheelchair accessible trails, and it seems like you surface it, you compact it, it's fine, and then it starts to degrade. And like, is there like best practices for how to resurface it, like what size rock to use? It seems like I talk to different people, like, what are mine? It's no 3/8, no 5/8, no, I don't have enough fines.
Yeah.
So,
I like 1/4 inch minus crushed granite. It's just granite's nice because it's a harder rock, it's super angular. I do think like the quality and the amount of fines does kind of depend on the quarry and how much it shifted around during delivery and how dry it was, because the fines leave the rock pretty quickly if it's super dry and dry enough to blow away upon delivery and installation. I also think ensuring that there's enough depth of crushed stone before whatever your bottom layer is, or if you're using geotextile, so that you could use like a power rake or a Harley rake or a gravel conditioner once in a while to go through and condition the top couple inches of surfacing without tearing up below it. Our plan, what we've been thinking about, I was considering using a binding agent in the top layer, but I think 1/4 inch minus, if installed correctly, will do just fine. Our issue is that it's going to get too dry in the summer. So I think the maintenance I'll be planning on is wetting it down like twice a week with a UTV with a water tank, and taking a loop through and ensuring that the water moisture is good enough so that we don't get any shifting material. But it will probably hold up throughout the winter, because usually we don't get like big deluge storms, only once in a while, and there'll be some snow and everything will probably be frozen in place. But yeah, it's the lack of moisture around here that will cause the issue. But yeah, getting on a cycle of wetting it down throughout the summer, maybe once a year, taking a power rake to it. Yeah, it's like you can put them on a tractor or a skid steer, but it's almost like a rotating grooming implement on a ski run groomer. It's like a cylinder with steel nodules on it that just rotates, and it kicks up all the material and then lays it back down. So it'll remove any ruts or anything caused by erosion or footprints, or if it wasn't installed properly, and you might get potholes just from different compaction rates. But it will smooth all that out. But I would definitely, for a high use crushed stone surface trail, I would plan on, having to add in crushed stone here and there once in a while, recondition it, keep it wet. Maintenance like that. But I've seen 1/4 inch minus granite, angular granite, do really well.
I don't know if we can get that where I'm at.
Where are you at?
Down in Vancouver.
Yeah,
Do you have a
but salt's pretty good too. Yeah.
Marinakis, a stone supply place down there? Marinakis?
Oh, that's the name of the place.
Yeah, they've got, I bought it, crushed granite, it's wonderful, it's pretty angular.
Yeah.
I think it would pack in pretty good and not maybe move around too much, because it's sharp and angular.
Yeah.
It gets, yeah.
I almost wonder if the bigger trail will be
Yeah.
combining children, because just from my own experience, they just will kick all the loose, like, that will be the,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That'd be my bigger concern is, look at, makes sense if you're coming through and compacting and writing,
Mhm.
times a week, but I would just think they might, but they can't help
Kick it
themselves
around.
kicking the, yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah.
yeah.
It gets, I just, I put a little pathway in my yard in the same way I would build a accessible trail, using 1/4" minus, and I'm super impressed. But I've done trails mostly on the East Coast with 1/4" minus,
Yeah.
and like I've seen, like East Coast rainstorms totally wash over the trail and it lives. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Power rake put my volunteers out at a work party. They might like that, because that gets really tedious to, they're like digging out grasses and sods and ground in and trying to resurface it.
Uh-huh.
We get it almost every year.
Yeah.
Not their favorite volunteer.
Oh, that's,
Okay.
more locations, but they might have recommendations being pulled up.
Check it out.
That was a place like you down in. So I had a question that, you know, I'm sure you guys also have that kind of dream phase, that we do this, then we do that, and, you know, but have you considered, not all disabled people, who would want to use this trail might have like an electric wheelchair or the capability with their upper body to move. Have you considered like getting a grant for 1 or 2 suitable electric wheelchairs that they could check out to use the trail? And maybe that would be in connection, it doesn't look like there's a facility there where they could check them out, but they could check them out maybe with the link. And I just bring this up because the beach vehicles are coming up, and that's very cool, and they're like suitable for sand.
Mhm.
And I've seen them on the beach up over by Long Beach, and it is that kind of a system if you want to use when you check one out for 3 hours, and it's a wonderful thing for people to access the beach who couldn't in their own like wheelchair or.
Yeah, they're in that belonging in the outdoors group that was happening at the same time as the Saddle Rock group. There were a lot of conversations about that, of getting equipment for people to be able to access the outdoors. And I think some of the barriers are just aside from the funding, is that who's gonna own it, who's gonna maintain it, where's it gonna be stored, like who's gonna be responsible for managing the equipment, and then the liability aspect of it as well. If there's ever any injuries or anything, or somebody gets out on a trail and
Yeah.
the battery dies, or, you know, something malfunctions. So there are definitely some conversations, happening around that, and hopefully some, evolvement of more local resources, over the next however many years. But yeah, definitely some conversations around getting people the actual equipment to take advantage of this kind of stuff, for sure.
One question we actually got a few times at some of the public input meetings was basically saying, like, not all people with disabilities only want to be on a flat little loop. So what are you thinking about, like slightly more, I don't know, less formal trails, or trails that provide a slightly different challenge for folks? And we are, but we're really just trying to focus on this loop for now. But beyond that loop, where it like heads into the ravine, there is space to put a trail that doesn't really meet wheelchair accessibility standards, but we could have a wider, 4-foot wide, more uniform style trail surface that kind of heads out into the ravine and comes back. So we are thinking about that. And our foothills trails around here are like tremendous for future adaptive mountain biking, if we make some adjustments to them.
You just made me think of working on a project where we had a lot of feedback in that really similar vein about like easier trails that
Mhm.
aren't necessarily like compliant, but one thing we heard a lot is, you know, the grade, of course, but then also just having like lots of opportunities for rest.
Mhm.
So, you know, having a trail that is more even and kind of like a loop or something.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily, and I forget what it's not called like accessible trail, but it's something in between where it's like a little bit more of a challenge, a little bit more of an extension.
Yeah.
Doesn't 100% meet compliance, but it's more appropriate for like an older person or a family with kids or
Mhm.
people who have less mobility but aren't necessarily like wheelchair bound.
Right, right. There's some really good. I wanted to go to the adaptive mountain bike thing presentation at this conference, but I didn't get to. But the Kootenai Adaptive Mountain Bike Group, I can't. That's not what it is because I know their acronym is CASA, KASA. But up in Canada, there's a group that has done a lot of work on specs for adaptive mountain bike trails, which I think apply perfectly for that class of like, it's not wheelchair
Yeah.
accessible, but there are certain standards that are purposefully developed to make it easier, like turn radius and in-sloping of turns, like setting maximum limits to that, to just make sure other devices can use it, or just folks with mobility concerns.
Well, hopefully in a week's time, you'll be able to watch the video of that other session.
I went this morning, it was good, right?
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, you should
Cool.
watch it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they did bring up those standards.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
kind of with the thought that wanting, at least within Washington, to have a set standard of, if this is how the trail is rated, that this is what it means, regardless of what area you're going to, that you know that these standards are gonna be met.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else?
There is your comment about aggregate surfacing just reminded me. I just saw the Professional Trail Builders Association. They have a webinar coming up. I think it's in December on aggregate surfacing for trails. I'm gonna watch it because I want to see if it's actually some folks I used to work with on the East Coast, but let's see if they found anything new in the last 5 years. So,
Because
yeah.
like every 3 years, and there's a couple of them, so it's like, you keep coming out, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Yeah,
very, very
thank you.
much.